Welcome, everyone. For those of you who aren't watching this live, today is January 20th. The long-anticipated defense industrial strategy has yet to be released. But amidst historic government spending, Canada has recently established the Defense Investment Agency to streamline procurement, which will inevitably lead to unprecedented economic benefits through our ITB policy. I'm Walter Chan with Strix, Canada's not-for-profit organization dedicated to promoting innovation and collaborative research in aerospace and defense. I've done ITB transactions on both the contractor side and recipient side, and spent over a decade doing ITB-related R&D projects in aerospace. I'm joined today by a very, very special guest, one of Canada's leading ITB experts, Clem, Srour, Managing Director at Tridus Stratégies. He's a former senior government official with 15 years at ISED. He's worked on offsets, including the value proposition for the replacement of our CP-140 Auroras, the CF-18 Hornets, as well as our future aircrew training and RPAS platforms. Clem, we're going to get into ITBs and defense procurements later, but what are your thoughts on the DIS? When can we expect it? What do you think is going to be in it?
Wow, what a way to start off this session, Walter. I wish I had a crystal ball. I'd be a lot richer. We all expected the defense industrial strategy like way back in December, and I can recall the Minister of National Defense back in October or November stating absolutely emphatically it was going to come out before Christmas, and it hasn't happened yet. I suspect, and I know I'm hearing that there's still a lot of back and forth happening between the various departments and to try to finalize this. I think we have to remember that this is a fundamental document. We have really never had a defense industrial strategy, at least not in my memory. So I think it's really important that they get this right. So to be honest with you, I think if we have to wait an extra month or so for it, I think that's probably all the better for it. And we also got to make sure that the three key departments who are involved in this are going to be aligned, right? So if they're going to take an extra few weeks to make sure that they're aligned on what the contents are, I think that's a good thing.
So a lot of people that you and I have spoken to have seen the preliminary versions of it or the summaries of it. So something is floating around internally when you're talking about the three levels of government, or the three departments. You're talking about ISED, PSPC, and D&D. Where do you think it's being held up? And
well, so
is there some disagreement between the entities?
Well, from what I understand, it started off at D&D. D&D held the pen on it, and then now it's bounced back to ISED, and ISED is looking at it and trying to make sure that they're aligned with D&D. I don't have I'm not on the inside anymore, so it's so that's my understanding, is that it's gone from one department to the other. I think part of the issue is that this document could reside in either department, right? Because it is the defense industrial strategy. So it's about defense, but it's also, I said, in the industry portion needs to be gotten right. So it can reside in either department, and therefore the two of them really need to see eye to eye on this. This is one thing I've said all the way along, I've been saying actually for the past couple of years since I've left government. In order for we need to get those two departments in particular better aligned, because if we're going to have a more resilient, and a stronger military, we need to have the defense industry there alongside with it to back it up. So we need to make sure that these two departments are lined up, and so that things like ITB, which is really my world, is feeding and directly supporting what the needs of D&D are. So again, if it's gonna take a little bit longer, I think so be it. But again, from what I answer your question directly, yeah, it's gone back to ISED right now, and they're playing with it, and I'm hoping and crossing my fingers that by the end of the month we will see something. So maybe y'all come back and fact check me on that and say Clem got it wrong.
All right, we'll have to have a sequel to this webinar. Yeah. So with the historic levels of government spending, obviously there's going to be the trickle-down economic benefits to industry through our ITB policy. I see a lot of SMEs in the chat. Rather than talking about how the ITB policy can benefit Canadian industry, let's maybe switch it. How can small businesses leverage the fact that we have a strong ITB policy to get business from this increased government spending? Because when we're talking about, the Defense Investment Agency, great, we can buy fighters quicker, we can buy submarines quicker, we can buy pistols quicker, but how can small businesses and academia benefit from that?
So I think, well, first of all, we've already got a lot of mechanisms in the ITB policy, the way it stands right now for SMBs and for innovative firms and for universities and that sort of thing. In fact, when ITB in its came to its current incarnation back in 2014, that was really what its intent was at that point in time, was the intent to try to orient it towards that's why it's called industrial and technological, to support not just the industrial but also the technological, that innovative piece. So they've set up a whole bunch of mechanisms, and we can talk about all those mechanisms to try to support SMBs and the innovation ecosystem in Canada. But I think now we're at a point now where having a good real look at what's in ITB, I think, is really important. And I know that there's been some discussion about that on the inside, and also just to make sure that ITB aligns with whatever is going to be in the defense industrial strategy. But you know what? If you're an SMB and if you are a university, or if you're just a supply chain partner, and you need to look at how ITB works, and you need to understand how it works. But at the end of the day, my message is always to companies is that ITB is just one of the keys to the door, but it's not the only key to the door. So you need to understand how it works and to leverage it the right way. But you need to also do your business development, your due diligence. You need to understand what's your value proposition, and that's not the ITB value proposition, to be clear, but your company value proposition. How are you going to leverage that, and then how at the same time you're going to put all that together and package it and within an ITB framework at the same time, right? So it's important, I think, that SMBs especially don't see ITB as a panacea that for in and of itself is going to get you in through the door. It is not a big pot of money that prime contractors have waiting to dole out to you. Let's be absolutely clear about that. So in fact, they are very, very careful about prime contractors are very careful about how they manage their ITB obligations. And what you really, really need to do is you need to look at what is important to them and align yourself to what's important to them, and that's going to help you get in the door.
So let's do a bit of a role playing here. Let's say you are a contractor. Yep. And you're bidding on a government procurement.
Yep.
And I'm an SME. You're not going to do business with me just because I'm an SME or I have Indigenous ownership or I'm in a specific region, right? You're going to want to do business with me because I fit in your supply chain somehow.
Exactly.
If you've already won the contract, am I too late to the game? Should I be talking to you?
While the
RFP is out, or is it still a possibility for people?
It's absolutely not late to the game. And if most people on this call, probably on this meeting, probably know that on the ITB website there's a list of all the ongoing ITB obligations, and there's probably, I don't know, the number is billions of dollars in obligations that have not been met at all. That's a good thing, right? So, I mean, I've seen some references in the press saying, "Oh my God, there's $30 billion of ITB obligations waiting to be spent," as if there's some fault somewhere out there because it has not happened. Prime contractors are very careful about how they manage that, and they're not going to go and spend $30 billion. They have a huge obligation. Go and figure out how to spend it within 6 months or a year. It takes them a long time to figure out how to do this in a strategic way. So look at what's on that list. See what's available. What prime contractors' obligations are out there. And you can reach out to them, but you also need to be a bit more creative about this. Think about the companies that are are currently vying for those big projects. Because I can tell you right now, if you go on that list, Hunwa is not going to be on that list. And I'm sure TKMS is probably not on that list too. I could be wrong about that one, but I'm sure Hunwa is not on that list. So you need to be creative. Don't just think about what's on the list. Think about what are the big projects coming up. Think about who the companies are going to be bidding on those big projects. And I would even go to one step further, because one of the big pieces of ITB is companies that are never going to, who have what's called who are called eligible donors. This is ITB lingo. These are the companies who are like a tier one supplier to the prime, and part of the obligation is usually flowed down to those companies. So think about which companies aren't not going to be on that list, but have an obligation as well through a prime contractor, and go and see them. But think about it in terms of which companies align well with what you do and what the kind of stuff that you do that will be good for them.
Clem, is that type of flow down to a sub tier to manage those offsets? Is that done at a transaction level with ISET, or is that internal to the contractor?
So that's it. So no one knows exactly who the tier one suppliers are, right? Because it's not public information, right? So it's internal to the contractor. However, I said anytime a tier one contractor is now, again, what's called an eligible donor, because this means that they are eligible to donate or contribute to the obligation, right? So they have to then go to the prime contractor has to submit a certificate saying that this company is an eligible donor to support the obligation. And I would go one step further in all of this. Many of these eligible donors are also have flow down contractual obligations. So quite often a prime contractor will contractually obligate their eligible donor in a flow down contract. So that what they do is because it removes the risk from the primes from themselves. So that means there's all these companies out there who you will never are going to see on any list anywhere, who also have ITB obligations, and you need to think about who those companies are and go out and talk to them.
Okay. We'll get back into in the innovation side and how
Sure.
SMEs and academics can benefit from this. For the people who are watching live, feel free to add some questions in the Q&A. We'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Clem, let's take a step back. In your opinion, does our ITB policy work? And I don't want this to be a history lesson from when we went to IRB to ITB, but let's focus more on the results of the audit, which was generally negatively viewed by the Auditor General. What do you think of the results of the audit? And there are some rumors that the terms and conditions might be changing. Do you have some insight on that?
Yeah, I mean there's a couple of things there. So first of all, I mean the audit dealt with some kind of broader governance type issues, and they also honed in on situations where the policy was not applied consistently in different situations, which personally I don't think is a terrible problem, because I would personally prefer to see a policy that where there's room for flexibility. I know that causes problems, and that causes potential for inconsistency, but at the same time, how it's ITB is already seen. If you go out there into the world and ask who has the most rigid offset policy in the world, they'll say Canada. Tell you right now, they'll say Canada.
I've heard that too.
They'll say Canada. So the way that the line from what the Auditor General said, they made some very, very important points, but they've also, I think, could potentially be pushing ISET into a situation where they add less flexibility into the system. So
hold on. You have to admit that's kind of biased towards the contractor side, that Canada has the most rigid ITB policy. You were talking about from the lens of someone who's trying to sell to the government of Canada, correct?
Absolutely.
If you're an SME or an academic as a recipient of ITB,
that's absolutely an excellent point. If you're from the prime contractor's point of view, they will actually say you will get a very different point of view about what the ITB policy is like if you talk to a prime contractor, and if you talk to an SME or anybody else who's looking to benefit from the ITB policy. I mean, I once heard somebody tell me if they end the ITB policy, all the prime contractors will have a big party. And I said, okay, well, I'm not too sure all the companies who are benefiting from this are going to have be having a big party. So I think it's to answer your first question, I think it met ITB met the intentions that it was set out for back in 2014. It was set up to try to better leverage the spending from our military purchases into more specific areas and to be more strategic about it. And that's why they created what we call the value proposition, where at least there was some umbrella or framework, where you're directed, you can try to direct the investments toward direct work or towards, innovation R&D, all these different things like that, right? So at least I think this is my personal point of view, is that where it's at now, it's at because of the way it was structured to be back in 2014. So from that point of view, it is a success. So, but yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, the strictness of it is something that's more in the prime contractors. However, I do have to say, though, there are many SMBs out there, probably some on this meeting as well, who will probably tell you they've had some bad experiences as well too from SMB, which for whatever reason, because maybe a potential transaction was not approved for probably a variety of reasons. Or there's also aspects of the ITB policy, like, and we can talk about stuff, like on the venture capital side, where it has not been as successful. All that to say is there's room for improvement, and I know ISET is headed in that direction.
Okay. I wasn't going to talk about transaction times till later, but you mentioned venture capital transactions. Let's get into that.
Sure.
If I'm a contractor, let's flip the scripts. I'll do the role play of the contractor, and I have the obligations, and you are an academic or an SMB.
Yeah.
How can I, instead of investing in R&D and innovation projects to meet my obligations, can I leverage the fact that there's a venture capital transaction? I would like to take that money instead, invest it in venture capital, claim my offsets from it to meet my obligations or a portion of my obligations, but potentially in the future recoup that return on investment through the gains I make in the venture capital.
Right.
How can I as a contractor go about that?
So you can absolutely do that now. However, the problem is that the way that they set up the venture capital, and for those who are not aware, there is an aspect of, and it's not very well known, there is an aspect of the ITB policy that allows prime contractors to make investments in venture capital funds, which the way venture capital funds work, they flow money directly into small, medium-sized businesses, especially innovative ones, like many people who are on this call. It has not been a great success because from my experience and from what I've been talking to prime contractors, by definition, if a prime contractor was to put $1 million into the venture capital fund, well, the venture capital fund decides itself usually who they're going to disperse those funds. They make the decisions based on, quite often, frankly, business decisions, right? Profit decisions about how they're going to disperse those funds. So quite often, prime contractors are not so happy with that lack of influence, and they want to be much more involved in it. The other issue, to be honest, is it's just an ITB issue, frankly. There's a problem is that there's a 5 times multiplier that you will get as a prime contractor if you do the venture capital fund. However, for prime contractors, they can get a 9 times multiplier if they go to the same company and they do what's called an investment framework transaction with that same company, and then they have more of the direct control into the transaction and into the results, and like they can align themselves. One of the issues is, I talked about it earlier from the SME point of view, but it's also important from the prime contractor point of view. They need to also align themselves with the right SMEs, right? They need to think about, who's going to be a good fit for me as well, too, right? So, and that's kind of the problem, I think, also in general with what's happened with these venture capital funds. There's also lots of other little problems, but I think there's there is a way to make this thing work, but ISET needs to look at that and to try to better study it.
Okay, so if I still have my contractor hat on,
Yeah.
I'm not going to invest in a VC transaction with a 5x, which would invest in your company.
Yeah.
You're saying I should go the IF investment framework transaction, get a 9-time multiplier by investing in you, but by doing that, I can't invest in equity. I have to be either giving a cash donation or selling you IP or giving you equipment, correct? I can't.
Absolutely.
So I guess that's the risk from the contractor's perspective is you get a higher multiplier, but I'm not getting equity out of that. So I don't potentially get a return on investment from that investment.
From the Prime's point of view, that's true. But on the other hand, I guess the way that's mitigated is that the whole idea of these investment frame transactions is that, and if you look at the terms and conditions, it has to be a 5-year relationship, right? So it's not the worst thing, from a government perspective, anybody's perspective, I think, is that you say, okay, here's $1 million. I get my 9-time multiplier. I'm going to go home and I'm good to go, right? That's not what they want, right? They want, I think from the SMB's point of view and from the government's point of view, you want to have to establish a longer term relationship, and you want to have, like, help improve their to get them to better success down the road, right? And I think having those partnerships, in many countries. I remember some years ago when I was working on Future Fighter, I met with some individuals from a major French firm, and they were telling me how in their company, this big multinational firm, in their company, it's a basic way of how they do business is to bring along SMBs and to work. They strategically choose them, and they help to bring them along. We don't do that as well in this country, I don't think. I think we need to think to do a better job in terms of how we can leverage the relationships with these prime contractors and help to support our small and medium-sized businesses.
Okay, then let's talk about a different transaction type, consortium transactions.
Okay.
And to your point, leveraging the innovative small businesses we have in Canada. Strix leads the INSAT program, the Initiative for Sustainable Aviation Technology.
Yeah.
One of the rules, the eligibility criteria for this program is that it has to be a collaborative project with at least one SME. There is a 5-time multiplier on consortium transactions, and I've spoken to a few people for an elusive, effective 10-time multiplier, because you can also claim the contributions of the other consortium members.
Right.
So how can SMEs and academics who are involved in INSAT projects use the fact that they are involved in these projects to leverage the contractors that are involved as well to maybe take a bigger piece of the pie in terms of their offset risk? And keep in mind, if I put my contractor hat on, there's 2 different budget lines. There's with the OEM, there's the offset budget, which a team of people who are involved in industrial participation, they go out and seek contracts, they work with supply chain, they look at where to invest in R&D. And then there's the IRAD, the R&D budgets. That's a whole, the engineers who are working on the technology.
Absolutely.
And they don't often talk, and they're not leveraging each other's budgets to do this.
You're hitting a nail on the head in terms of a big problem is that, if you go to, these are big companies, you go to Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, C-SPAN and everything a little bit different. These are huge companies, and they have a team of people who do offsets, maybe 3-4 people, and they have to do this for this big, huge company. And you're absolutely right. They might have a bit of an offsets budget, right? But then, so you're the company, you're part of INSAT, and you want to now, you have an idea for an R&D project. So you go to talk to the R&D person, and they have the budget for it, but they have no clue anything about offsets, right? So then the reverse happens. You go to the offset guy or gal, and you say, hey, I've got this wonderful R&D project. We can do a consortium transaction. I've already got the university lined up to work with us, and now they have to go chasing to find who's the right person, in their R&D shop, to make the marriage work. So I personally am of the belief that, and there's my recommendation, is if any of you have those relationships already, on the non-offset, non-ITB side of things, start with leveraging those relationships. Because when you have leveraged that relationship, and if you have a dance partner in that relationship, then you bring the offset ITB person into the picture, and that makes everyone's job a lot easier. You'd have less convincing to do for all the way around. And many companies do the other way around. They start off by reaching out to the offset person, which is sometimes you have no choice because you don't have any other contacts in the company. And then you have to work with them to try to make those linkages to somebody else in the company. But going back to consortium transactions, I think are a great way to go. Look at what you're doing right now. Look at what universities are doing right now, which ones are involved in research and which professors are involved in research that lines up with what you do, and put together a plan and bring the plan to the prime. Hey, we've got already something together here on paper that we can bring to you, and it's a done deal. We're already going to work together.
Potentially more than 5, and maybe even that 10
Absolutely.
if you include their contributions.
Exactly, and that's an excellent point, by the way. It's a math thing actually, where you can include the contribution of the other partner as well. So if they have it, sometimes they don't always have the money to put into it, but if they do, they can match the contribution, and that also gets credit as well. So absolutely.
So what about the SMEs and academics here who are listening who aren't typically involved in defense R&D, and they say, well, this doesn't necessarily apply to me? How can you explain that, even though your company doesn't necessarily do defense work purely, to still benefit from the ITB policy and the obligations that the contractors have, specifically when it comes to dual use technology? I basically want to get into dual use technology and how we talk about dual use in Canada.
Yeah. Sorry, so what's your question, Walter?
Well, how can the SMEs and academics listening now feel involved and feel like they can benefit from the ITB policy, even though they're not necessarily doing pure defense work?
Oh, well, I mean, ITB is the way it's structured now, unless things change. It's not purely about pure defense work. It's absolutely intended for dual use and even beyond. So although nowadays the name of the game is dual use, but I think just still on a bit of a side thing there. Like, you have to kind of be careful that you're talking about strategic dual use technologies versus, I think about it, there's dual use and then there's defense as a marketplace, right? So I can make paper clips and I can sell them to defense because defense is a marketplace, but I don't think that's really dual use, right? So there's dual use in terms of, you have a technology which is right now being used in the medical sector, for example, and it has amazing application here as well in the defense sector, and you just need to build that relationship with the prime contractor now to work with them to help them to how you can adopt this technology for the benefit of the defense sector. So I think there's a lot of potential in that regard out there, and I have to say right now, like I said, there's so many mechanisms. And I'm sure people on the call are aware. There's the regional defense, regional RDII, Regional Defense Industrial Initiative, something like that, which is which regional development agencies are using right now. There's the application periods I think are open right now, when it's targeting dual use. There's NRC IRAP's new program as well too, which also is targeting dual use. So I think this is a really great time if you are in dual use to go after those funds. However, I do have to say, though, all of these funds are a little bit different than how ITB would play into this picture, because those funds are great because they get the funding that you need, help you to go and do what you need to do to develop the technology and for the defense market. On the other hand, if you do it through ITB, and say you get an investment framework transaction, it's very different because now you're tied into a prime contractor. You're tied in directly to a company potentially who's actually going to be interested and may want to buy that technology. So there's actually, in some respects, it could be a little bit better, to do it through these ITB mechanisms.
Yeah, I love that you said that. We talk about it all the time. When you innovate together, it's just organic that you end up being part of that company's supply chain. Start with them from the grassroots, work on technology together, and the OEMs will already have you as part of their supply chain. Clem, we're running out of time. I wanted to get into some questions too.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a good segue. Actually, you're talking about the RDII, the Regional Development Investment Initiative. Let's take some questions here. The RDII is kind of geared towards the regional development agencies, which are run by the federal government. How can provincial governments leverage the ITB policy to help their companies?
So that's a great question. I think
shout out to Savannah for that question.
Yeah, thank you, Savannah. So you could in theory, stack some of the support. Like if you're working with so say you're working with a company on a particular project that they want to do, and now they also want to apply for work with a prime contractor to try to leverage that and get additional funding. So you could potentially do that. You could potentially stack those investments through ITB. So keep in mind that provincial government or any level of government money is public money, right? On the other hand, ITB money is kind of, well, it's a bit complicated, but it's money from the prime contractor, right? It's their money, right? So it's a little bit they look at things very, very, very differently. So just keep that in mind, that there's a relationship of how the money is being spent between different levels of government and between a prime contractor. Somebody in the private sector is going to be looked at very differently. But you can't stack them. If you have champions out there you've been working with and you want to get them to work with, encourage them to work with prime contractors, I would say absolutely go for it. But again, I should emphasize though, the ITB space is getting very competitive. Like everyone right now, even before defense became the name of the game, everyone wanted to get into ITB. So because of that, again, like my earlier message, you need to think about very strategic, how you're going to be working with a prime contractor and how you can get them to invest in you versus everybody else out there.
Next question. Let's talk about banking. So for those that don't know, contractors can bank offsets against future obligations that they may have if they win a contract. The question from Tristan: are there many prime contractors using the ability to bank? And maybe you can get into the nuances about what you can and can't bank, because there's some specifics there.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tristan. So banking has exploded in the past 3 years. It's absolutely exploded. I know one company who I've worked with, he may actually be on this call, who's they become a master at banking, but they're not a prime on any ITB obligation. But they've done an amazing job in leveraging the banking policy. And let me back up a little bit what banking is all about. Basically, there's the real intent of banking was that it's like it's like going to the bank. So you have a transaction, but you don't have an obligation, right? You have this great project that you want to do, and you can tie it to, you meet all the eligibility criteria, but you don't have an obligation to put it against, right? You might have one down the road, you don't know, potentially, right? So what do? You put it in the bank. And that was one of the reasons why I said created banking, was because quite often companies would say, "Hey, I've got a transaction, but the bidding process for that particular project is not 3 years away." So I said created the banking for that. However, what's happening now with banking though is that banking has become a major way for companies to support their business development efforts. If you start out now and start to put transactions into the bank, even though you have no obligations, and just about anybody can do banking, you can now you have a whole bunch of stuff in the bank. You can go if you're leveraging work with a prime contractor, say a Hanwha or a TKMS, and you go and talk to them about this wonderful widget that you've got, the best thing in the world. And oh, by the way, I've got all this stuff in the ITB bank that can support your obligation. So now it makes you more interesting potentially to a prime contractor. So
Do
a
the
lot of
contractors and recipient have to establish causality for you to bank?
all the rules for ranking apply across the board, except for one, and that's who is the eligible donor. But it's a minor detail. But across, if you're banking, you're basically acting like a prime contractor. End of story. Right.
Okay,
So
but you have
you're
to show
dealing with
that
ISED,
reason-
you're dealing with there's a banking team at ISED, and I can't remember the number now, but that was just in a briefing recently, where I wrote down somewhere. It was like, I'm not going to say the number because it was 800 transactions in the bank. That's right. I remember now. It's 800 transactions, but I can't remember the value. It was well into the billions.
Okay.
So I think it's a great way if you want to look at doing, to try to leverage your positioning with prime contractors. Banking is a great way to do that.
Okay. I got a question here from Ian. Clem, can you share your perspective on how universities can evolve to be better partners to both SMBs and eligible donors while meeting the intent of the policy?
Yeah.
And I'll add to that. What we're seeing is, a lot of universities, at least in Canada, are usually reluctant to engage in R&D projects that are involved in defense. And we see that a lot in Canada, but not all over the world. And academia can play a huge role in helping those early low TRL projects get off the ground.
So I think, Walter, that's changing. In fact, I just had a meeting yesterday with a university who's, I'm not going to say which one it was, who's looking at increasing their presence in the defense space. So I think most of them are trying to do that, and I know some universities are a little bit gun shy, wrong, no pun intended, gun shy about how much they get involved in defense. But I really think that's changing. So I think it's about lining yourself up with looking at, and I know you guys have done a great job at University of Alberta in doing this, looking at how, what's the expertise you've got in your with your academic people, their professors, etc. And how all of that lines up with potential interests of activities of SMBs. Going out there and actually talking to the SMBs who might be doing things that could be aligning well with what the research interests are of the university. And then, like I said earlier, align that and put together the project and bring it to a prime contractor. But again, align that with what the prime contractor needs, because if you're going to bring something to the prime contractor which is completely out of their bailiwick, they're not going to be interested. But actually, my other piece of advice, by the way, is I can tell you right now that the ITB teams at just about every prime contractor is getting emails all the time from companies, so they're a bit flooded. And sometimes they're not going to respond to you right away, if at all. And not a strike against them, but just because they're getting so many inquiries. One of the ways I think around that, I think, is try to get them at events. So if you go to any major shows at CanSec and stuff like that, schedule time with them over there, and you'll have much more luck trying to meet them at those places. And at the same time, is that by doing that, you'll have more than the ITB person there. You can, if you have a great discussion, he or she pulls in a BD person or supply chain person sometimes, and you can hopefully have a more fulsome discussion.
Yeah. You know what, I'll add to that. We have people on the Strix team who have previous lives in government and in academia. So I understand the limited bandwidth part, and especially in academia with the limited resources in business development, is partner up with the SMBs who are doing research that align with your fundamental research that you're doing.
Exactly.
And find the ones who are reaching out to the OEMs and the contractors, because those teams are more likely to be engaging continually with the OEMs. And the OEMs, I think, are more open to having those discussions with small businesses that can see, a future supplier down the line or some return on investment for their work, as opposed to just doing pure research with universities.
Exactly. Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Clem, we're running out of time. Where can people reach you, and what What
So
can we
yeah,
do to
thank
help
you.
them out?
You can reach me at my email, clem.srour, clem.srour @tridus.ca. You can reach out on my website, tridus.ca. You can reach me on LinkedIn. There's a number of ways that you can reach me if you want to have a chat. I'm happy to always have a chat with anybody. You know, if you want to go further in a chat, we can have talk about that as well too. And happy to see how Tridus can support you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. There were so many topics we didn't even have a chance to get into, but this was a great discussion. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
great.
Thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate it.
Well, there might be an
last words?
opportunity if they announce some changes and there's the defense strategy money comes out. Maybe there's an opportunity for a follow-up.
All right, I'll take you up on that, Clem.
Okay.
Have a great day. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.